today we're with George from DMOTO, who's going to talk to us about if you're thinking about buying a used Ducati or even a new one, some things to look at. And once you've got the bike in your garage, some things that you can check out yourself. So thanks for talking to us today, George.
That's all right, anytime.
Okay, so if someone's looking to buy a second-hand Ducati, what sort of things should they be looking
Well,
for?
the first thing you look at is probably bodywork, foot pegs to make sure it's been dropped, let's see if it's been dropped or not. And an always good teller is the steering stop. In an accident, a major accident, the steering stop will be slightly bent. So they're the things you can check. Basically, you check bottoms of forks to make sure there's no scratches or anything. They'll show you if the bike's been over or not, or what kind of extent of damage. Check around the steering head, none of the tubes are damaged. And also, just the bottom foot pegs and everything like that. Have a good visual look over the whole vehicle to make sure nothing's damaged. They'll tell you whether anything's going wrong. Next check I'd probably do with the mileage, and basically bring up your local mechanic and ask him if that model's had any major extents, like an ST3 had a lot of cracked frames and stuff, cases and frames. So, you know, they'll advise you to where to look and check if it's been cracked or whether it's been replaced and stuff like that. Usually if frames or cases have been replaced, the engine number won't be stamped as nicely as a normal Ducati. You can look at that sort of thing. If the frame's been replaced, VIN numbers have been stamped in Australia because they haven't been done by the factory and they don't look as neat. So you can check those things out. That'll tell you a lot of different things. Mileage is very important. If a bike's been well serviced and everything, you can check the oils and stuff like that. Make sure how clean it is and whether it's been looked after properly. You probably check your chains for wear and tear. You come around here. To check a tension of a chain, you put pressure on the chain, and if you can actually pull it off the sprocket, it's worn. If there's no pulling off the sprocket, you can just check adjustment and stuff like that. Make sure it's got a bit of free play as normal with adjustment. That's one way. And checking your sprocket to see how worn they are and stuff like that. And basically check your brake pads, the wearness of them, how thick they are. You can get a little torch. But brake pads are not just a replaceable item. It's not a very expensive thing.
With brake pads, what the different types of brake pads for road use? What would you sort of reckon would be the?
They're all fairly similar. They're not too bad. But some people like using the original Brembos. They're quite expensive. We use EBC here. Most of the brands are pretty good. They're not too bad. Unless
you've got the sintered and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, sintered. Depending what you're doing. If you're doing a lot of harsh braking, sintered a lot better. They recommend them in superbikes and stuff like that a lot better. But just normal compound pads are pretty good. With tyres, you can check on tyre wear. There's, I'm not sure if they have them on this side, but they have a wear limit. So they have a little gap. Might be on the front here. You can usually tell by the wear in the grooves, and they've got a little stop. I'll show you in here. If you look in there, it's got a. That's if the tyres go down to that little step there, they're worn out. Right. Okay, and you can tell by the middle how the shape of them.
Yeah.
If they're nice and round, they're pretty good. If they're not as round and got edges on them, like the front tyre go into a point, they're worn out. They need replacing.
Do tyres have a like a shelf life? Can a tyre look okay but be
Well, you can
finished?
sort of feel it on the tyre. Probably tyres that are over 5 to 6 years, it's probably a little bit worn, depending what kind of how they've been treated, and you know if they've been sitting for a long while and then reused and stuff like that. But if you have a feel on, you can feel how hard or soft they are. Usually bikes that have been sitting around for 10 to 20 years or something, you can tell how hard they get and stuff like that.
Okay, so the service intervals now on the modern Ducati is about 15,000, is it?
Well, the new ones are 15,000. Originally, they were the first service 1,000, then 10,000 services.
Yeah.
We've always recommended changing oil in between.
Yeah.
And Ducati recommend a yearly service.
Yeah.
The most important thing for these engines to make them last is probably fresh oil all the time. So I recommend every six. They've gone to 12,000, now they're 15, the new one. I'd probably recommend changing the oil every 6,000, oil and filter at least, and do a minor service, because things come loose unless you're there and you can adjust and tighten up all your nuts and bolts. Things come loose all the time. The most important on these things are subframe bolts. They always come loose and no one checks them, and there's a lot of weight sitting on them, and they end up cracking the frame and stuff like that. Side stand bolts, because there's a lot of weight on them, people don't tension them up and they can crack crankcases and stuff like that. It's very important. And just general check of your calipers and everything else, steering stops and everything else. Another thing to check is probably steering head bearings. If you can take the weight off the front wheel, if they're worn out, they'll be notchy. A lot of water gets in there and usually they corrode and stuff like that. Or if they've been in one position for a long time, they'll get that notchiness just in that middle section, and then they need replacing. It makes the bike steer a lot nicer. Other things to check. Running on the bike. Now, all these modern bikes have got oxygen sensors and they run really lean down low. This day and age, we can either put a Rexa flash on it, a tune buoy, Ducati performance stuff, like a new ECU and stuff like that, or retune it and stuff like that, and get them pretty good. With the tune buoy stuff now, you can remap your whole bike and make it run absolutely beautifully. So there's a lot of stuff you can do with the new modern bikes, and it's changing. The newer stuff with the Bosch ignition, ECUs and stuff, they're still learning what they can do with them. They can't get into the computer, so that'll take another year or so. They're trying to get into them at the moment. But other than that, most bikes will run a bit lean down low when you go to test ride to about 3 or 4 grand, and then they sort of clear themselves out, and they still run like an exhaust valve. So that comes in about 3.5 grand. It closes the exhaust. It's for emission controls and the noise testing and stuff like that. So if you can get rid of that, it helps the bike a lot in running wise, but for the government reasons, we've got to keep them some of them. So.
What about the different fuels, 95, 98? Everyone's sort of, got different opinions on that.
On the early Ducatis, 98 used to foul up plugs all the time, so we don't recommend 98. It's like 95 plus with additives. So we recommend like 95 and less, most of the bikes. With 98, you can get away with it on the modern bikes with all the oxygen sensors and everything else like that. But on a general rule, 95 is probably about the best, and the early one's probably 91. It's a lot better.
Okay. And what about with suspension? Why should someone change the spring on a bike, and also the rear suspension doesn't? I'm not sure if it's like part of the servicing to get it serviced in like general maintenance in the schedule. How often do you reckon should that be done? Or?
Well, they don't list rear shocks to have a service at all. Usually, front forks they recommend 36,000 for the oil changing. Most shocks, unless it's an old, you've got to send it to a specialist to get serviced. You can usually feel what the best thing is to do with your suspension is if you have a look at the shaft and see if it's leaking, that'll tell you the seals are worn out. And same with the forks. You can see there's oil on the staunchion, and that'll tell you if they're leaking. The Olin ones seem to leak a fair bit, but Shell ones do leak as well. Then you need to replace the seal and service them. And basically by bouncing the suspension, you can feel if there's any dampening, compression and rebound. There's 2 adjustments on this shock. It's an Olin's one. So that's a compression adjuster on the reservoir. And the other one's a rebound, which is a real difficult one on these 1098s, 1198s to get to. It's underneath, it's a clicker. And same with the Olin's front. The compression dampener is a clicker in here. So what you do is screw them all the way in and count the amount of clicks out, usually about 10 clicks either way. And there's a rebound up here. And same thing, screw it all the way in and count the amount of clicks out. Probably about 10, unless you go on the track, probably drop it down a couple more clicks. And there's a spring preload by doing that nut there. You can screw it all the way in, or you screw them all the way out and count the amount of turns. And it's basically a set amount of sag, like a 1G for racing and stuff like that.
So that should really be, if someone's buying a bike, one of the first things they should do is set it up for their weight.
Yeah. Mainly, most of these Ducatis are set up for about 76 to 80 kilogram person. So none of us are that thin, especially me. So you can get away with them because they're usually set up for doubling and stuff. You mainly notice it when you go onto the racetrack. So heavy acceleration, the back will squat. So you usually go a heavier spring. If you're going to do a lot of racetrack work, it's worthwhile going to get a 1G from your local mechanic or get a suspension person to do it for you. And they'll advise you on what spring to put in there. And you can adjust the suspension. And if you look at these bikes, we used to drop the forks through. We used to make them a lot more stable in the front end and stuff like that. So there's a few adjustments you can do to make them a bit better. But even when you're looking to buy a new bike, a good check is to make sure the fork seals aren't leaking, the shock seal aren't leaking, and you can bounce the bike to see what it's like, whether it just needs adjustment. When we were talking about side stand bolts, these are the bolts that screw into here. They should always be tensioned because there's a lot of weight. This holds up the whole bike. And basically frame bolts are a very important thing as well, checking the tension of it.
So a good tool for everyone to have would be a torque wrench in there.
Yeah, torque wrench, or even half the time if you can't afford a torque wrench, just make sure they're firm and you get a sort of good feeling on it.
Yeah.
With the bigger bolts, you can put a lot more weight in them. Smaller bolts, just light tension and stuff like that. If you're not sure, you can drop into your mechanics or us or whatever, and we can go over them and help you out how to do it all. All right. Basically, with adjusting a chain, the best thing you can have is a rear bike stand for your particular model. So this is a particular bike stand for $11.98. So basically you put the rear stand on. Now Ducati recommend to adjust the chain, you have weight on the rear wheel. So it's like having it on the side stand. And basically on every motorcycle, they have this sticker here. And basically, even in your handbook, it'll tell you how to adjust your chain. Then again, if you're not sure how to do it and you don't have a stand, we're happy for you to come around and we can show you how to do it or do it while you wait. So basically, it tells you to adjust the chain in the middle of the bike, which is about here, in between the two sprockets. And you use a little ruler. So if you put a ruler in there from the swing arm down to the middle rivet, that's how many millimeters. This one says about 35 mil to 38. So basically you put your ruler there, and what you want to do is spin the wheel and check where the chain tight spot is, because a loose chain's better than a tight chain. So once you get to that tight spot, if it's here, that's where you adjust the chain. So on this particular single-sided swing arm bike, they're the easiest to do. You need a C-spanner. It's got a big hub eccentric in here and 2 pinch bolts. So these pinch bolts are torqued up at 33 Newton meters. Now if you don't have a torque wrench, you can wipe them down, put a texture mark on it. So when you undo them, you can do them both back to do one at a time, so they're firm. And you basically go anti-clockwise on this particular model to make the chain tighter, or clockwise to make it tighter, and then you lock those pinch bolts up again. So, but when it's a double-sided swing arm, if it's been adjusted properly, if you see where the adjustments are, what I basically do is undo the axle half a turn, axle nut, and then those pinch bolts, if you turn both of them like quarter of a turn each, clockwise, that'll bring the swing arm back evenly, and then check where your tension is, and then if that's good, then you lock up your axle, depending what model and what torque it should be. You can always find out on your bringing up a dealership or a workshop or whatever and asking what torque it should be. And then after you've tensioned the axle, the pinch bolts on the back plates, you've got to make sure they're tight, because if they come loose, they'll swing around. I'll show you on a bike. So if you don't tension these up last, these pinch bolts, that plate will come loose, fall out and jam into there, damage your swing arm, damage your wheel and damage everything. This is a race bike, so it's got carbon fibre ones, but they should always be firm, and they'll stop them from coming loose and falling off.
All right, thanks for today,
No worries.
and we'll talk to you again some other time.
All right, thank you.